It's Friday, people, and that means it's time for some Countdown to Classic. Welcome to the podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and thank you for joining me for our weekly Friday edition of the show, where we cover off on the lore or history of vanilla World of Warcraft. Today we're actually benching the lore for a week and focusing on the history side of things and discussing one of the more famous player-driven moments in the history of World of Warcraft, the vanilla days. I was going to do multiple incidents, as I told you a couple of episodes ago, but the more I delved into these topics, the more I thought they actually warranted their own episodes and time in the spotlight. Now, just before I get into it, if you do like what you're about to hear, then please do subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts from, and like, follow, or subscribe to the show on all social media platforms, where you can find the links at countdowntoclassic.com. Please do stick around until the end of the show for more show news and updates, but for now, let's get straight into it with a scoop of vanilla. How does one deal with death within a virtual world? As players, we forge strong friendships over a common love of gaming and a love of a particular game when it comes to MMOs, and World of Warcraft is certainly no exception. Obviously, real-life circumstances will have a heavy impact on our virtual lives, and with real life, unfortunately, comes real death. The death of a friend or guild member may see us mourn, not only outside of the game, but within it as well, as a sense of tribute to our fallen comrade in arms. Such occurrences are not necessarily uncommon, and in-game funerals have become somewhat of a known quantity in MMORPGs these days. However, the early days of such sad events within the World of Warcraft were not without controversy, as one particular in-game funeral event became so infamous and well-known within the community, it's something that is still talked about by players of vanilla to this day. It all started with a post on the 3rd of March of 2006 on the Illidan server forums, 15 months into vanilla World of Warcraft's lifespan. The post was put up by a Horde player named Yanoa, who wrote the following under the title Memorial to Phagin. On Tuesday, February 28, Illidan lost not only a good mage, but a good person. Phagin was one of the nicest people you could ever meet. On Tuesday, she suffered from a stroke and passed away. I'm making this post basically to inform everyone that knew her. Tomorrow, March the 4th, at 5:30 server time, we'll have an in-game memorial for her so that her friends can pay their respects. We'll be having it at the Frostfire Hot Springs in Winterspring because she loved to fish in the game. She liked the sound of the water. It was calming for her. And she loved snow. If you would like to come and pay your respects, please do. Phagin was a 52-year-old female member of the Posters Guild, who was a beloved and contributing member. But before we get into what happened at the funeral, it's important to note a few surrounding circumstances and get a feel for the environment of World of Warcraft at the time amongst its player base. Illidan was a PvP server, and PvP in World of Warcraft was going through a somewhat tumultuous time back then. The minds of the developers over at Blizzard HQ began to turn with concepts of how they could get an even larger proportion of the player base involved in PvP combat. World PvP, the experience of coming across an opposing faction out in the open world while wandering around adventuring and engaging in a battle to the death, had been a huge part of the game. Obviously mainly on PvP servers, for 7 months since World of Warcraft's release. However, in the hope of expanding the game's PvP experience and giving players more PvP options, on the 7th of June of 2005, patch 1.5 was released, and Blizzard introduced the Warsong Gulch and Alterac Valley battlegrounds. These were added to the game as instance zones where players could square off against each other, separate from open world PvP. However, players still had to trek across the open world in order to access these battlegrounds. That was until patch 1.6 arrived soon after on the 12th of July of 2005, when Battle Masters were introduced into capital cities to remove the need for players to haul ass halfway across the world to get to a battleground. PvP was now at your virtual fingertips, and there was no need to adventure to get there. The PvP experience soon gained a further addition with patch 1.7 on the 7th of September 2005, with the addition of yet another battleground, Arathi Basin. So, with 3 straight major patches, and there were a couple of very minor ones in between, but these 3 straight major patches resulted in 3 significant changes to the PvP experience within the game. Changes that were especially felt on PvP servers. Players had spent their first 7 months in the game without battlegrounds and had grown accustomed to, and fond of, world PvP. Some felt that these large changes would have a negative impact on world PvP, as those players interested in the PvP experience would stay within the safe confines of capital cities, speaking to battle masters to get to battlegrounds in order to get their fix of PvP and their honor. A portion of players felt that world PvP was going the way of the dodo, and some players began to speak out about that problem. This was the spark that lit the fire that burned this funeral to the ground, as a couple of alliance guilds, both wanting to voice their displeasure with the perceived downturn in world PvP and get some good griefing in along the way, decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and head along to Winterspring as well to pay their own respects. As many of you would be well aware, Winterspring is a contested territory in World of Warcraft, so on a PvP server, as soon as a player of either faction enters the zone, they are immediately flagged for PvP, and are all considered fair game within the zone. Despite this inherent danger, approximately 100 Horde players showed up in response to the forum post advertising the funeral, and it was very much so an open invitation, unfortunately for the original poster. But things seemed like they were going swimmingly at the outset, as a highly well-organized funeral procession was very much underway. A friendly guild member had logged into the account of the recently deceased player and placed her character by the shore of the Frostfire hot spring, staring solemnly out at what was perhaps one of her favourite spots to try to fish. An orderly queue of mourners gathered to pay their final respects to the figure by the water, and in single file planned to move one by one and say their piece or tip their hat. The mourners had even ditched their armour and weapons, unequipping all their beloved greens, blues and purples for more appropriate funeral attire, much as one wouldn't turn up to a funeral in real life wearing all white. Some wore mere common dress wear, or some went without gear at all. A decision that may not have been so wise in a contested zone, but one that was of the moment. Whilst this procession was being organised, elsewhere, another procession was underway. The Alliance Guild Serenity Now, along with members of another guild, Gnomeland Security, who frequently aren't cited in the story, but can clearly be seen on the footage that was taken that we'll talk about soon. Guild leader of Serenity Now, Matt Comment, playing as a rogue by the name of Azshira, led a travelling caravan of bloodthirsty griefers to the very spot where the funeral was taking place. Kement, too, had seen the forum post advertising the funeral and decided to rally his guild to pay some respects not only to the gathering Horde players, but also to Blizzard themselves. In a February 2009 interview with a YouTuber named Mr. Internet, which can still be found on YouTube today, Kement was asked why he led the two guilds to Winterspring that fateful day, answering, essentially, it was to encourage PvP, which had been lacking on Illidan since the introduction of Battlegrounds. We felt that Blizzard was yet to address the issue of PvPers, and instead just shrugged them off as a small voice. As Serenity Now and Gnomeland Security arrived at Winterspring, they intended to show Blizzard that the PvP community's voice was not small at all, but rather large and merciless. Kement himself, as a rogue, popped himself into stealth and took stock of the scene before him, wondering where to begin. But it was not a hard decision for him to make, and to the horror of the Horde onlookers, a rogue by the name of Azshira appeared before them and proceeded to slaughter the motionless body of the deceased player's character in virtually one quick beat. At this sign, the rest of Serenity Now and Gnomeland Security moved in and unleashed hell, all to the haunting tune of Scatman, the 1995 dance anthem that many people my age awkwardly tried to somehow dance to while chasing their first kiss at a junior high mixer. The reason I say that there was theme music was that the entire incident was being filmed by the unwanted guests and was eventually edited and posted online by Kement, turning into the reason that the event became as infamous as it is, turning into an early viral hit and amassing millions of views from players and non-players alike. When asked about the video in the aforementioned interview, Kement said, "We first put it up on Google Video, where I think it got about 2 to 2.5 million views there. Then we had the title for the video contain a bunch of sexually explicit stuff just to get more search results, and people didn't like that and they took the video down. We put it back up on YouTube and it got about 3.2 million views as of today," being February 2009 when he did that interview. Some people began to say that the original intention of the video being made was that so Kement could send the video to family members of the deceased player. However, I've only found 1 or 2 references to that in my research for this episode, and Kement himself says nothing of the sort in his interview, more of which we'll get to soon. So my gut feeling is that theory can easily be debunked, also purely out of the ridiculously callous and unfeasible nature of it. How is he going to track them down, the family members? Did they play the game as well? Also, it's one thing to ruin a virtual funeral. It's another to rub a family member's nose in the death of a sibling or daughter. I highly doubt from viewing the interview with Kement that this was ever really considered, despite the cheeky troll vibe that he elicits. Anyway, back to the funeral. Many of the Horde players remained in the funeral queue, despite the bloodbath that was now occurring before their eyes, either realizing that there was no point in running or fighting, or perhaps even that they were AFK as they were waiting in a line that might have taken some time to get through. But eventually the crowd did disperse, either by virtue of death or simply not wanting to become a victim of a heinous crime and deliver satisfaction to the gatecrashers. However, in the end, the funeral procession was decimated by the gatecrashers, with quote-unquote honourable kills being racked up left, right and centre. Kement himself seemed to fell about 20 victims on his own during the one-way fight. The dust settled, players returned to capital cities and eventually logged off. Then the forum posting started in reaction to what had just occurred. Comment says the following. The reaction was about 75% bad and 25% good. Shortly after it went down, our site got hacked. People started going nuts on the forums. People started going nuts in-game. We had people coming online on forums saying, I'm the girl who died's brother and I'm going to sue you all. The flood of abuse, threats, and general hatred flowed online over the actions of Serenity Now, as Gnomeland Security's attending members were generally forgotten about and escaped much of the abuse. Players began to debate the morality of overstepping unspoken boundaries, despite obviously still technically playing within the so-called rules of the game. And as Comment says, it indeed did seem to be about 75% against and 25% for the actions of Serenity Now. Comment wound up using a number of the angrier posts at one point of the video as an intended comedic angle into the lack of remorse shown by the guild over their actions that day. When asked what the end game was from the whole incident, Comment said the following, "Attention. We just kind of capitalized on the 15 minutes of fame that came with it. If we didn't do it, someone else would have. Whether you're for us or against us, it doesn't matter much. People have been made more aware now that PvP still exists. We achieved our goal." The forums raged for a month or so, but as with all news items, eventually found its way out of the rotation. The purported cry for PvP awareness that Comment stated was a driving purpose of the assault went completely unnoticed, or at least unaddressed by Blizzard. No battlegrounds were removed, and World PvP wasn't promoted much in general outside of the addition of World PvP objectives in patch 1.12, which were largely designed simply to correct player issues with a prior edition of dishonorable kills. What became of Serenity Now? Well, soon after the release of the Burning Crusade, Serenity Now broke up and basically became nothing but a memory of one of the more infamous moments of not only World of Warcraft, but MMO history. And those are the facts of the Serenity Now funeral slaughter. So what I figured we would do on today's episode is do a bit of digging into some older forums into player reactions from back at the time. This did require a little bit of digging, but luckily wasn't too hard to find, as I did actually come across one thread from April 2006 with a number of responses in reaction to what Serenity Now had done. So with that information in hand, now it's time for That's What We Said. Each Friday, Countdown to Classic brings you a few reactions from back in the day from the forums in relation to the content that we've just discussed. Now, with relation to Serenity Now and the funeral slaughter, there are a number of issues that are raised, such as morality, PvP griefing, and how we deal with in-game funerals and things of that nature. Let's get stuck right into it with this first forum post from a user named Senator Cthulhu, who says this. Serenity Now are postmodern heroes, rightfully deconstructing the utterly absurd notion of any kind of pathos being associated with a funeral, classic apathy inducer number 1, that occurs in a virtual setting, classic apathy inducer number 2. Owned hard, in my opinion. And the point that user raises is this, and I should say, by the way, obviously, if you haven't heard the show before, what we do here is we argue for both sides of the coin. So if I'm about to say something that upsets you, please do know that I'm going to argue against this very point very soon. So we argue pretty hard for both sides here on the show. But getting into this post, their point is this. Let's stop taking everything so seriously and pump the brakes a little bit, people. This is a game and needs to be treated as such. This is not real life, and as much time as some people invest in it, it's not supposed to invoke any of the kinds of strong, deep emotions that we might experience in real life. Enjoy the game as exactly that, a game. It might make you laugh, cry, and smile due to the beauty of the art and the experience, but when you use it as a platform within which to strongly project real-life issues, feelings, and viewpoints, it can become somewhat problematic, as this is not meant as a substitute. How seriously is one supposed to take World of Warcraft? Do we take these issues that we carry with us in real life into our virtual lives, as far as we do with things like funerals? How do you feel about in-game funerals? Do you feel there's absolutely a place for them? And of course, what better way to show our respects for a fellow gamer than to do it within a game? That's what the gamer community is all about. Is that what you say? Or do you feel that no, Josh, they have no place within the game? They're absurd because these things are games. Keep the paying of respects to real life. Write to the show and let me know. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. I would love to hear you weigh in on this. But now we move to the opposite post from user Ben, who says this: yes, but collectively they've probably had sex like twice, which I suppose makes them stone cold pimps in your eyes, so never mind. Seriously, this isn't funny. It's sad. Fucking with someone because they're losers is always childish, but it's the height of hilarity when the people doing the mocking are equally pathetic. And the point of that post is, why would you applaud or look up to the members of Serenity Now for what they did on that day? They didn't achieve anything. What they did not take any skill whatsoever. All it took was the prerequisite of being an asshole. These are false idols of your adulation, even within a PvP environment. They mock these people attending this funeral because that's pretty much it for them. These are the lofty heights, this 15 minutes of World of Warcraft fame that these players will ever achieve. This is why a video was posted. They crave the attention, knowing that without that, there's not a whole lot going on for them. It's sad. It's genuinely sad that these people have this as their definition of a good time. This is not what PvP is about, and certainly this is not the way to bring attention to your plight if you're trying to reach out to Blizzard. What they did crossed a line of morality and general decency as a human being. We move on to the next post from Gordon Cameron, who says this: I agree. If people want to congregate online to remember a dead friend whom they presumably knew best in the context of the video game, I don't have a problem with that. I don't hold relationships formed online to be inherently meaningless any more than I would say relationships formed via correspondence. And any ritual has as much power or meaning as its participants choose to invest in it. Nonetheless, I have no problem with Serenity Now doing what they did. It's a PvP server and they are being jerks. But that's the whole point of a video game with a PvP server. It allows people to be jerks and let the virtual consequences fall where they may. The Hordes should have foreseen this and held the damn service in Mulgore or Durotar or wherever. And what that post is saying is this: this is somewhat of a grey area, morally and rule-wise in a way within the game perhaps as well. Yes, online relationships mean something, and it's fine and great to pay tributes like this within the game. Go nuts if that's what you enjoy doing. But understand that when you do so, there are circumstances within which you are paying your respects. You're doing so within a PvP realm. You are gamers. You know what comes with that. There is competition out there. There is generally at times a lot of people out there with what may be termed low moral fiber. A lot of people also might have maturity issues or simply just be kids playing the game who don't give a shit. Also, we're playing within an environment of war, the World of Warcraft, not the World of Peacecraft as we joke. This was the perfect storm for exactly this kind of situation. What were they expecting? Despite the fact that it is perhaps a little bit shitty, it's still playing within the bounds of the game and hence places it within a grey area, as we say. However, we go now to the post of a user named SimPilot who says this. You know, if this was just one guild dumb enough to venture out on a PvP server unprotected, I'd say fine, hilarious. But a very real person died. Someone who treasured their life just as much as any one of us and died before their time. That's terribly sad. And what Serenity Now did was beyond bad taste. It was incredibly immature. I mean, off the freaking official immaturity measuring scale. Should they be punished? No. They didn't break any rules except as moral people. But they sure get my pity. On my worst day, I can't imagine doing this to someone who is genuinely grieving for the loss of a friend, virtual or otherwise. I guess a guild making fun of 9/11 victims is next. And what this post is saying is this. There are 2 points here, being that of maturity and morality. We turn first to maturity, and we have to cast our minds to what may be the age and circumstance of the players involved in actions such as this. Well, in watching the interview with the guild leader, I must say that Commence didn't look like the kind of guy who, well, to put it nicely, let's say he didn't strike me as the kind of person who had a lot to do that day or that week, which I appreciate. I mean, I can look like that too when it's pants off Fridays at my place, so perhaps I shouldn't throw stones from a glass house. But there is a spotlight that is cast on not only the players involved, but also the person leading them as to what kind of maturity they are possessing when they choose to take part in these kinds of grey area actions. Are there kids playing? Are there kids following this man saying, yes, we will absolutely take part in this morally ambiguous behaviour? Or is it grown people who perhaps should know better but don't care anyway? There's no sense of responsibility. What do they owe these people who they are now decimating? Then there's the question of morality. It's correct that they did not break any of the game's rules. Was there a terms of service breach? I would argue no. If corpse camping isn't considered harassing behaviour on PvP servers, then this certainly wouldn't be. But was a moral code breached? What unwritten rules do we have in World of Warcraft? We devise them on our own as a culture. We give tips for portals. We wave to people when we get a buff. We stab people when we are insulted, etc., etc. Is there a moment where one can tap out essentially and say, I'm not playing at the moment. No, sorry, I'm not. I know I'm playing WoW, but I'm not actually playing WoW. I'm doing something here. I'm having a funeral for my friend. So please go away with your PvP play, please. Not right now. Is there a breach of a moral code when we choose to ignore that player waving the white flag? Is there a line that we cross? Write to the show and let me know. feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Here's an article I actually found that goes into this question of morality a little bit further. A little bit of a long one, but listen to this because it's quite interesting. In a paper submitted to the Oslo 2009 Philosophy of Computer Games Conference titled Dual-Wielding Morality, World of Warcraft and the Ethics of Ganking, Stacey Gogan writes about how the effect on the video game community generated such a polarizing effect is due to the grey area of the raid. She uses the example of holding a conversation in the middle of a water gun fight and how different levels of context change our reaction to it. To understand the status of Fajin's funeral, one can use a less controversial topic to tease out the ethical distinctions in the matter. For instance, if two people are having a conversation while standing outside in public, on a sidewalk or in a park, a person who approaches these people and shoots them with a water gun, while not necessarily having committed a horrible, terrible breach of ethical code, has been somewhat disrespectful to them and their conversation. At the least, they've been rude. However, if two people are conversing about strategy during a water gun fight, again in a park, the same shooter blasting them away in the middle of their talk is not being disrespectful. In this case, the significance of the two people's conversation is encapsulated within the game, and so out of game, the shooting has no significant moral relevance. This is the case of single-wielding one's agency. On the other hand, if someone in a water gun fight receives a phone call that a relative is sick and then holds a conversation with someone else in the middle of that game about driving down to the hospital, the water gun shooter, aware of the nature of the conversation, would actually be out of line in shooting water at them. Although their conversation is taking place in-game, it has a deep significance out of the game. And so the shooter would be dual-wielding their moral agencies if they drenched the two other players with water at that moment. The shooter would be perfectly within game rules, but would have breached a serious notion of moral decency outside of the game. And that article delves into this. With the knowledge of the circumstances that Serenity Now had, at the time, they very much so knew that there was a funeral going on. Was there an expected adherence to an unseen moral white flag? The oldest of military respects not to decimate these people. The waving of the white flag, we all know what that sign means. It's universal. However, Serenity Now chose to take a take no prisoners approach, something that we as a society have deemed as abhorrent behaviour. We move to the next post from user Lizard King, who says this: how far are you willing to take a ridiculous standard for respect? It is their prerogative to engage in their pitiful little ceremony in a virtual war zone. I would not expect real-life combatants to respect that unless there was something in it for them. Why would you demand it of imaginary ones who face absolutely no material consequences? And that post raises a very valid point. Firstly, how far do we take respect? To what standard do we hold it in a virtual world? This is war. Why would you think there are rules? And why would you think that there is decency? We've signed up to a PvP server and we're out there to kill each other, especially in contested zones. They engaged in the rules of war and they asked us to forget them for a brief moment in time. That is not how it works, even in the real world, let alone in a virtual one where, as this poster says, there are no consequences for disrespecting any kind of rules that you might feel should be appropriate, even though they are technically unwritten. We move to the next post from user Kagan, who says this: in a war situation, an attack like that would offer a strategic advantage and would make strides towards winning the war. In World of Warcraft, the war can never be won. They gain nothing by attacking the funeral other than their own amusement. If it was some stupid role-player funeral where no one really died, I could understand that motivation, and I too would join in on the laughter. However, a real life was lost. Would you go streaking into someone's funeral in front of their friends and family in real life because you don't like the guy? No, but of course we can't hold internet behavior to the same standards as the real world. But I think this one qualifies. It's an act of disrespect towards the recently deceased and the bereaved for no other reason than to be disrespectful. However, I don't really understand why the hell these people were thinking that having it in a contested zone was a good idea. They pay the price for their own stupidity. The point that user raises is there is literally nothing to be gained by Serenity Now in taking this action, perhaps outside of honor. But you're not winning the war in Warcraft by doing this. This is not turning the tides of battle into the favor of the Alliance. This does not shift the environment of the players. This didn't move mountains and make waves. This meant absolutely nothing. It was done purely and simply as a laugh. They wanted to take some macabre enjoyment out of griefing some players who were quite simply trying to enjoy a quiet moment with friends in mourning a fallen comrade. What end could it possibly have served outside of that for Serenity Now? They knew what they were doing. They knew they were being jerks. And if being a jerk was all that you wanted to do on that day, then what else? Why do it? What else could you possibly get out of it? How could this possibly tickle your fancy? Just going to bed that night, smiling to yourself and knowing, wow, I was a jerk today. Good for you. That was a good day. Tell me, would you show this kind of disrespect in real life? If not, then don't do it here. Now, these last two posts are relatively long ones, but they're really, really good, so I wouldn't be reading them to you if I didn't really think that you would benefit from them. So the second last post is this from user Zeran, made on March 27, 2006. And I found this one on an old Twisting Nether Gazette forum, and it says this. I'm a master's student in IT. Much of what's being discussed here relates to a paper I wrote a while back about anonymity on the internet and Plato's tale of the Ring of Gyges. The Ring of Gyges would render its wearer invisible. They could commit crimes and no one would be able to catch them. So the question is, what's to keep the person from committing crimes? They can't be caught. Why not rob a bank? Or steal from people's homes? Or murder? The same construct exists over the internet. You don't know who I really am. As someone from the military so eloquently put it, there's no punch you the fuck out patch. You don't key cars in a parking lot because someone will punch you the fuck out. If you tell someone they're ugly or stupid, or if you try to take their money, someone will punch you the fuck out. This inability to get caught is exactly what tards like Serenity Now rely on to act like arse-hats. However, there is a catch. Much like the argument Plato made regarding the Ring of Gyges, there is a check in this system. When people behave by the rules, even though they don't have to, it's better for everyone. And when they don't, it's worse for everyone, including the offenders. Serenity Now has a reputation for being idiots on that server. Yes, they successfully griefed a bunch of people. Even if you liked what they did, having seen the video, would you actually trust them? Would you loan them gold? They don't care about other players, which also means they probably don't care about you. I suspect the new Serenity Now fanboys will be changing their tunes when they themselves get burned by Serenity Now members. The immediate consequence is a bad reputation. On the internet, a reputation is all you really have. There is another, more ephemeral consequence as well, as more along the lines of what I think Plato was driving at. Being good results in a happier, more stable, more enjoyable environment for everyone. I'll put this in World of Warcraft terms. A group of the opposite faction is raiding a town. You slaughter all of them. Do you A, back off so they can res and fight again, or B, corpse camp them? This situation has presented itself several times to me in WoW, and I always say the same thing. Back off and let them res so we can fight again. I usually get the same responses also. Shut the fuck up, we're camping them. My question is why? I play this game for some diversion and some action, not so I can stand over someone's animated toon corpse for 20 minutes like an ass. Too often, the group I'm in camps them, and I usually start wondering what's on TV in the process. A couple of times we let them res, and we fought again. And again. Those are the best times. Lots of action, many honor kills, no downtime. By acting good, we all have fun. By acting bad, we all end up bored. So I guess the point of this long-ass post is this. Serenity Now feels happy that they did something stupid. Let them be happy about it. What they did to themselves will last a lot longer than that video. And that was an amazing post, and it goes into obviously a few points, but I'll start with this. How does internet anonymity, and in particular within the World of Warcraft, affect your behavior in general? How do you find yourself playing the game knowing that no one knows who the hell you are? Do you act a fool, or are you still generally well behaved? Write to the show and let me know some of your reactions or some of your better stories due to your anonymous behavior. Feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Are you a griefer in World of Warcraft, but an angel in real life? Is the only thing keeping you from murder and pillage in real life the fact that you can't do so anonymously? Is life just better when viewed through a positive lens, like the poster says? Does that apply to World of Warcraft? I think there's a lot of merit in what they said, that when generally everyone is universally being polite or good, it results in a much better player experience for everyone. When someone is being bad and not necessarily engaging in a fair fight, it does, in turn, generally, for at least one party and maybe both, result in a negative experience. But what is a fair fight? Should it be allowed, the corpse camping and things like that? Is it all is fair in love and war, craft? Or is it something that perhaps should be reviewed? I'm hearing a few of you jumping up and down, and I'm not really suggesting that it should be reviewed. Obviously, corpse camping is not something that Blizzard would ever really look at because it's part of the game. I'm just stirring some conversation here. The next post comes from the same forum from user Grish, who says this, posted on the 26th of March of 2006. This is quite a hot topic for debate in some circles. Most people are outraged at this kind of behavior. Then, of course, there are the usual, wow, you guys are so awesome, losers who will do anything for attention. After looking at this, I've realized a few things. One, internet-wide, in some circles, it seems to have become a mark of pride to be a griefer. We have whole guilds devoted to this stuff. We've even seen on our server numerous times guilds like this. Then, there are the folks that will do everything they can to commend bad behavior, as seen on the boards. Guys who will go, oh my fucking god, you're so awesome, I want to be just like you, about anyone that manages to get an angry response out of people. And number two, there are two types of players. Those that think that the net is a place free of any sort of rules, including decency. A place where there are no consequences for your actions. A place where you can get away from the responsibility and rules of the real world. These people are directly opposed by others, like me, who believe that rules and order are not something confined only to the real world. In fact, the digital world is the same as the offline world. Actions should have consequences. Anonymity behind a keyboard gives you even less of a right to be a jerk. I'm trying to view this objectively, but actually I'm just really sickened by it. I would give a month's pay, probably more, to be able to find guys like that and introduce real-world consequences for their actions to them. Yeah, they got to me, so in essence, they win. But still, is this the way things are going to be for the remainder of the time humans have access to the internet? Should people like this be allowed the same rights everyone else enjoys? I've always been against rules and regulations, laws, punishments, and so forth, mainly because I believe people should and can be left to regulate themselves. They don't need to be babied and have someone with a big stick standing over them all the time to make sure they behave. Now I'm forced to reassess these beliefs. It's depressing and scary all at the same time. That was another great post, and the first thing I'm going to pick up on is I completely disagree with the fact that they're anti-rules and regulations and thinking that society could effectively look after and police themselves. Given the industry that I work in, guys, believe me, people cannot and will not police themselves. Anarchy is a very, very real threat. And as soon as we as a society get the first hint of the fact that some kind of lawfulness is broken down, trust me, we go apeshit. And it's not a good sight. So I'm not on board with the people can regulate themselves argument. But moving on from that, the point they're really kind of raising is it cool to be a griefer? We live in this gamer culture and we all know slightly about what it means to be a gamer. Sometimes a lot of gamers actually loudly applaud a lot of kind of shitty behavior. And the question would be, again, in the realms of the internet that we have today, perhaps as opposed to as it was back in 2006 when the Serenity Now incident occurred, do you think that 75-25 balance that the leader of Serenity Now said he got on the forums, that about 75% of people were against what they did and about 25% were for them, do you think we would retain that ratio today if this happened? Would 25% of people be pro-Serenity Now? Or do you think it would be a little bit higher? Knowing what we know now of the internet and the way in which we use it and the way in which people act behind the shadow of anonymity, do we have slightly thicker skin when it comes to toxic behavior? And hence, are more and more people slowly sort of getting not necessarily on board, but kind of okay with dipping their toes in the water of either applauding toxic behavior or not necessarily denouncing it? Let me know what you think. One final post to go out on, and then we're done with That's What We Said. And it's this post from user Uncle Larry, who says this: how can anyone with a heart watch that Serenity Now video and not smile? And what that post is saying is actually quite reflective of my feelings on the matter. Now I'll get a little bit personal on you guys and tell you what I think of the Serenity Now video all these years later, but also how I felt at the time. I saw it in the moment. I was one of those millions of people, as I'm sure many of you were, who saw it in the moment. And this is how I feel. I'm okay with it. I laughed at it, but I'll tell you why. Because I'm an asshole with no soul. Through my line of work, I've unfortunately developed a slightly twisted sense of humor, and I might unfortunately chuckle at times at things that absolutely do not warrant any form of said chuckling. I'm asked on a daily basis to be made of nothing short of the highest of moral fibre and act as a wielder of the proverbial sword of justice. If you're not sure what I do, I'm a lawyer. I'm a public prosecutor. So to put it crudely, I put the bad guys away, so to speak, or I try to at least. So that's what's expected of me on a daily basis. But in saying that, it's when I'm away from work that I feel it's nice to be able to step away slightly from being that person and not take life so seriously. And I don't. This is a game. And as much as it means to me and so many others, I'll always view it through that prism. Is it a shame that the funeral couldn't have been respected? Perhaps. Did it make me laugh? Absolutely. I'm not part of the outrage culture, nor will I ever be. That's a game for people who are very different from myself. Life is short, and I've got better things to do with what little time I have. such as playing World of Warcraft. But that's just how I feel about the matter, and I completely understand people who are disgusted and outraged by what Serenity Now did on that day. Perhaps you feel that there absolutely are lines that shall not be crossed, and I respect your opinion. But me personally, I don't take things too seriously, and I'm not going to be up in arms about this. I had a chuckle. I think it's funny. No disrespect of the dead. That's just how I feel. But with all that being said, it's now time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic comes to you with some of the angriest posts in relation to the content that we've just spoken about. And what I've done this episode is, because I couldn't find some of the old forums in relation to what Serenity Now did, because a lot of them are gone, funnily enough, a few of the posts, as I mentioned earlier, were actually posted in the now famous video, and so I'm just going to read those out to you. If you watch the Serenity Now video, you'll see what I'm about to say, but this is all I've got, guys, but they're quite funny and quite angry, so here we go. The first is from user Sirius, who says this: I sincerely hope you all go die in a fire. Then we had user Al-Hazred with this one: Grats Serenity Now on proving you're the biggest douchebags on Illidan. Then we had this from user Sarganos: You're fucking trash. You're not good enough to lick the fucking dog shit from a beggar's boot, you fucking degenerate. Sorry excuses for mentally ill humans. Next we had this from user Yoshimitsu, who says: I hope Ashira's dad dies of a heart attack. Then at the funeral, some guy runs in naked and pushes the coffin over and runs around slapping people, screaming, "LOL, owned," then releases a video of it. And finally this one from user Vegetecron, who says this: Regardless, if you know something serious is going on, why be such fucking pieces of shit and try to make it more stressful? Seriously? You know why? Because you and all the rest of Serenity Now are real-life pieces of shit that have nothing better to do than to try to grief people as hardcore as possible. Instead of being real PvPers and entering battlegrounds, you bitch out and gank lobies, and anally crave opportunities such as this one to make yourselves feel good inside, because in real life, y'all ain't shit and you know it. There you go. That's some angry stuff. Anyway, next it's time for not tidbits this week, but we're going to do a memory lane. With Memory Lane, Countdown to Classic brings you some people's more insightful, memorable, or funnier memories from back in the day of vanilla. So, I'd been a bit backlogged recently, and I've apologized to you a few times, these users who have waited so patiently for me to read these out on the show, and they probably sent them in up to 2 weeks ago, and I haven't forgotten about you all. But please, listeners, if I don't read your memory lane submission and you feel I have forgotten you, please do write to me and say, Josh, you arsehole, you haven't read my story yet, and jog my memory. But I think I'm slowly getting to them all. There's more to come on Monday, so if you don't hear yours, have a bit of faith. I'm trying to get to them all in the end. But the good news is, at least I'm getting more and more listeners and more stories. It's a good problem to have. Thank you so much to everyone for writing in. But we'll start with this one from listener Arladan, who says this: Hey mate, I'm not sure if you've commented on this amazing piece of WoW vanilla history or not. In case you haven't, I wanted to point it out to you before I forgot to do so for the Memory Lane segment. The event I'm referring to is what was dubbed the Million Gnome March. I didn't participate, but did spectate some as I played on the RP server Argent Dawn at the time. Every general zone chat from Ironforge to Duskwood, where I was questing at the time, was buzzing with talk of the protest. I got disconnected 2 times watching much of this transpire before giving up when the server was pulled down. And I say thank you very much for writing in, Aladan. And guess what? That email was actually the inspiration for this episode that you've just heard. And we are very much so going to get to the Million Gnome March soon. But all in due time. We've got plenty of episodes to come, guys, so don't worry about it. Corrupted Blood, Leroy Jenkins, World Bosses, we're going to get to it all. The next Memory Lane submission comes from listener Saperon, who says this. My first foray into World of Warcraft was during the beta, back when there wasn't as much info. I knew I wanted to play a caster, so I read up as much as I could on the spellcasting classes. At first I wanted to play a mage, but then I read that mages required something called reagents that cost money in order to cast high-level spells. I took this to mean that mages spent money to cast high-level versions of Frostbolt or Fireball. I didn't want that, so I felt the smart thing to do was to roll a Warlock instead. Strike one for noobishness. I made my Warlock and named him Sapirion, after the blue dragon that Arthas raised as a frostworm back in Warcraft 3. Except I misremembered his name, it was actually Sapphiron. Strike 2. I played my misnamed Warlock until Goldshear, where I met a friendly high-level player who asked me what I thought of the game. I told him that I wanted to play a mage, but was scared off by reagents. They laughed and told me the truth of the matter. In shame, I walked Sapirion into the fireplace of the Goldshear Inn until he died, deleted him, and remade him as a mage. However, I didn't want to redo all the content I just did as a Warlock. I wanted to try a different starting zone. So I ran to Goldshear and found the helpful high level and asked for directions to the Night Elf starting area. They said it was a long journey, but thankfully the Deep Run tram was implemented not long ago, which made the trip faster. It was a lot of trial and error with vague directions, but I pulled it off. I stepped onto Teldrassil with wonder and awe. The low-level Night Elf players reacted similarly to my presence and crowded around me. They'd never seen a human player there before. I truly felt like I accomplished something cool. A little parade was formed and I was directed towards the Night Elf starter zone, where I could start my leveling experience in earnest. And then I discovered there's no mage trainers in Kalimdor. Strike 3. Dope! And thank you very much for that one. I did enjoy that one. Next, we have Discord member Scrub Express, who says this. So, sometime in the summer of 2006, my Alliance Guild was in the middle of working our way through Blackwing Lair, and our server, Anatheron, crashed. While we were waiting for it to come up, not realizing it would actually be a few hours, we decided to roll some Tauren characters on some other random server. So there we were, 20 plus Tauren swarming around killing everything in the starting zone. Then somebody had a brilliant idea. Hey, let's go to the human starting zone. So we ran to Thunderbluff to get a guild charter, promptly naming ourselves Humans at Heart, and began our epic quest. I don't remember all the details of the journey, but being all under level 5, we did a lot of corpse running. Corpse running through the Barrens to Ratchet, corpse running through Stranglethorn Vale and Duskwood, and finally our destination, Elwyn Forest and the Northshire Abbey nestled within. We slash-danced with all the humans and started clearing all their quest mobs to make their lives miserable until the inevitable happened. A level 60 showed up and started cleaning house with us. At this point, our server was back up, so we'd had our fun anyway and we logged off. I know I don't forget that night, and I hope some of those Alliance players remember us as well. Thank you very much for that one, Scrub Express. And that's it for Memory Lane for the week. But I want to read you one more email I got, which is more in a bit of clean-up about something that I spoke about earlier in the show, back about loot councils and things of that nature. I had a fair few responses with people wanting to talk about this. And this email was from Boradin, the level 60 dwarf priest, who says this. Hey Josh, I've been procrastinating on writing this mail for some time now about guild loot systems. I've played private servers for over 3 years now, and my Alliance guild, Might and Magic, since disbanded, had one of the most fair loot distribution systems I've ever experienced to date. Here's how it worked. Loot was divided into tiers. Tier 1 was the most current content or other items that were highly sought after. Less sought after gear in a Tier 1 raid could be branded as Tier 2, depending on how sought after it was and how many classes could make use of said piece. This required at least a 70% attendance to acquire, which is fair since it benefits the people who consistently show up and raid. If you fulfill said requirements, you're allowed to roll on said item. If you win said item, you need to wait until the rest who are eligible for Tier 1 items until you're allowed to roll again. This type of system is called round robin. Tier 2 was items from lower tier raids. These change as new content is released, but to make an example, let's say Blackwing Lair is the newest released content, that would make Blackwing Lair Tier 1 and Molten Core Tier 2. Tier 3 mostly consisted of fringe items that are used for PvP or very fringe use purposes. Signed, Baradin, the level 60 Dwarf Priest. P.S. If it's alright with you, could I get a shout out to my former guildmaster, Elanos/Dutch, and all the officers of Might and Magic? You made the vanilla journey a truly pleasant experience. And I say I am happy to do that for you, Baradin. And while we're shouting people out, the Discord of Countdown to Classic has been going off this week with constant chatter. And the chatter is unbelievably intelligent when we're focused on the game, that is. There have been some fascinating bits of information and insight on the game shared there this week, and the members are incredibly knowledgeable and polite. I'm with a few Discords, and I've got to say, even though I know I have an obvious bias here, but despite a little bit of a slow start chat-wise, the Countdown to Classic Discord is honestly my favourite one now. So I just want to give a quick, big shout out to the following people who are going above and beyond to help make it not only the place for the thinking man or woman to come and chat World of Warcraft, but also one of the friendliest ones. So shout out to King Mike, Ianitis, Minoru, Palfurus, North Bear, Octane, Seven Winters, Father Ping, Macroplanet, Valerie's Gun, and 2. If I've left anyone out, which I probably have, I'm so sorry, but know that you're all appreciated. Please do come and join us on the Discord, everyone. A lot of great things happened there. Just this week, you could have seen me give away $20 in prize money to a lucky member, Seven Winters. Well, actually, it cost me $37 in Aussie dollars, which is half a PS4 game here, but anyway. But we were chatting away, and he mentioned he'd never seen The Simpsons. Naturally, I flipped out as a huge Simpsons fan, and I told him I'd pay him $20 to watch 4 episodes of my choosing, and he did it straight away with proof by screenshot, and earned his money. And a podcaster always pays his debts. So, what 4 episodes, you ask? Well, jump in the Discord and find out. But fun things are always happening there, and we'd love to have you join us. People are absolutely flooding in by the day, and it's so great to see. You'll find the link in the show notes. Please do check it out. But that's about it for this week. I've got about 5 more interviews lined up over the next 2 weekends, and I'm really excited to be bringing those to you, covering topics such as classes, role-playing, tanking, PvP, and so forth. So stay tuned. I'm very, very excited for the guest appearing this Wednesday. I won't reveal who it is, but I'm sure you'll all enjoy it. Don't forget, I'm taking calls tonight and tomorrow night. You may be hearing this episode on a Friday afternoon on your way home from work, ready to get the weekend kick-started. But what better way to get into it than by calling Countdown to Classic? If you heard the great calls in Wednesday's episode, you can be a part of the show by hitting me up on Discord or private messaging me on Twitter at my account Count2Classic with the number 2, or by emailing me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. I take these calls from about 6:30 p.m. onwards on Friday and Saturday nights. But please do get in touch, guys, as these calls are going to be a fantastic feature of the show moving forward. And with that, I shall now bid you all adieu and have a wonderful weekend, and I'll be back with you on Monday. Bye, everyone.